In the gilded halls of the Kremlin, the quiet exchange between two men is steeped in symbolism. One, a towering figure of authority in a resurgent China. The other, the embattled leader of Russia, facing the storm of a brutal war in Ukraine. They speak of change. Unprecedented change. The kind of change not seen in a century, and they promise, together, they will drive it. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, the Emperor and the Tsar, stand shoulder to shoulder, bound by a shared mission to reshape the world in their vision. But what is that mission? And what does it mean for the rest of us? To understand the monumental nature of this partnership, we must look beyond the immediate backdrop of war and economic sanctions. This is not just about military alliances, energy deals, or economic cooperation, though these are all crucial elements. It is about two autocratic leaders who feel cornered by the West, determined to shift the balance of power away from a world dominated by the United States. Their bond is both personal and strategic, and it has deep roots that stretch back to the end of the Cold War and beyond. This is the story of how China and Russia, once rivals, have forged a partnership that could reshape global geopolitics for decades to come. It is a tale of energy, military power, shared grievances, and a joint ambition to upend the Western-led global order. The relationship between China and Russia wasn't always a friendly one. During the Cold War, their ideologies diverged sharply, and for a time, the two nations were more foes than allies. In the 1960s, their differences even led to skirmishes along the Sino-Soviet border, a conflict that seemed to confirm their estrangement. The US, under President Richard Nixon, exploited this rift by forging ties with China in the 1970s, isolating the Soviet Union further. But by the late 1980s, as the Soviet Union teetered on the brink of collapse, pragmatic leaders in both Moscow and Beijing recognized the value of rapprochement. They realized that settling territorial disputes and avoiding costly confrontations would allow him to focus on internal challenges. Thus, a new chapter began, one rooted not in ideology, but in shared strategic interests. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia emerged as a weakened state, desperate for economic revival. China, on the other hand, was beginning its meteoric rise as an industrial powerhouse. The two nations found common ground. Russia had the resources China needed, energy and military technology, and China had the cash and market potential that Russia lacked. This dynamic laid the foundation for a partnership that would only grow stronger over time. In 2001, Vladimir Putin, early in his presidency, signed a treaty of friendship with Chinese President Jiang Zemin. This treaty was more than a diplomatic nicety. It was a blueprint for cooperation that would span energy, trade, and defense. Over the next 2 decades, as Putin consolidated his power and Xi Jinping rose to the helm in China, this partnership would evolve into something much deeper. If there is one thing that has cemented the Sino-Russian partnership, it's energy. China, with its insatiable demand for oil and natural gas, turned to Russia as a reliable supplier. For Russia, China's energy market was a lifeline, especially as Western sanctions and economic downturns bit into its revenues. The energy trade between these two nations became a cornerstone of their relationship, with pipelines crisscrossing their shared border, pumping millions of barrels of oil and cubic meters of gas to fuel China's industrial boom. This energy bond is not just about commerce, it's about power. For China, securing energy supplies from Russia reduces its dependence on vulnerable maritime routes controlled by the US and its allies. For Russia, selling energy to China provides an economic buffer against Western sanctions. In this way, energy has become a geopolitical weapon in the hands of both powers. But the cooperation doesn't stop there. Russia has also played a pivotal role in the modernization of China's military. After the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, Western nations imposed strict sanctions on China, cutting off its access to advanced military technology. Russia, grappling with its post-Soviet economic collapse, stepped in to fill the void. It provided China with advanced fighter jets, naval ships, and missile systems, technologies that would become the backbone of the modern Chinese military. This military cooperation has continued into the present day, with joint exercises becoming increasingly common. The Vostok exercises, held in Russia's Far East, have featured Chinese troops and equipment, signaling to the world that these two militaries are learning to fight side by side. In 2019, they even conducted joint air patrols over the Sea of Japan, prompting Japan and South Korea to scramble their fighter jets. These operations are more than just symbolic. They are preparations for potential future conflicts where Russia and China might find themselves aligned against common adversaries. At the heart of the Sino-Russian alliance is a shared grievance, a deep resentment towards the United States and its allies, whom they perceive as bent on containing their rise and undermining their sovereignty. For both Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, the post-Cold War era has been one of Western dominance, with the US acting as the world's policeman and NATO expanding its reach into their spheres of influence. This resentment came to a head in 2007, when Putin delivered a fiery speech at the Munich Security Conference. In front of a global audience, he accused the US of seeking to impose its will on the world, using NATO expansion and unilateral military interventions to spread its influence. This was no ordinary speech. It was a declaration of opposition to the US-led global order, one that would shape Russia's foreign policy for years to come. Putin's complaints about NATO expansion were not without merit. Since the end of the Cold War, NATO had grown to include several former Eastern Bloc countries, encroaching on Russia's borders. When Ukraine and Georgia expressed their desire to join NATO in 2008, Putin drew a red line, warning that such moves would be seen as a direct threat to Russian security. 4 months later, Russia went to war with Georgia, asserting its dominance in the region and sending a clear message to the West: Russia would not tolerate further encroachment. Xi Jinping, too, has his own grievances with the West. Since taking power in 2012, he has overseen China's transformation into an economic and technological superpower. But this rise has been met with growing resistance from the US, which sees China as its primary strategic rival. Under both the Trump and Biden administrations, US policy towards China has hardened, with trade wars, technology bans, and military alliances in the Indo-Pacific all aimed at containing China's ambitions. For Xi, the Taiwan issue looms large. He has made it clear that reunification with Taiwan is central to his vision of China's Great Rejuvenation, and he has ramped up military pressure on the island, raising fears of a potential conflict with the US over Taiwan. In this context, Russia's support becomes crucial. Should China move to reclaim Taiwan, having Russia as a partner, distracting the West with its own geopolitical maneuvers, could tilt the balance in China's favor. The 2022 invasion of Ukraine marked a turning point in Russia's relationship with the West, and pushed it even closer to China. As Western nations imposed sweeping sanctions on Russia, cutting it off from global markets and financial systems, China stepped in to fill the gap. Chinese companies have continued to buy Russian oil and gas, helping to prop up the Russian economy. Meanwhile, Beijing has provided Moscow with crucial access to the Chinese currency, the renminbi, as a means of circumventing US-led financial sanctions. But China's support for Russia is not without limits. While Xi has publicly called for peace in Ukraine and urged diplomacy, Beijing has been careful to avoid crossing Western red lines. China has not provided Russia with overt military aid, and it has maintained a delicate balancing act, supporting Russia enough to keep the alliance alive, but not so much that it risks a direct confrontation with the US and its allies. For Putin, China's support has been a lifeline. Isolated from the West, Russia has become increasingly reliant on China for both economic and diplomatic backing. But this dependency also underscores a deeper shift in the balance of power between the two nations. While Russia was once the senior partner in the relationship, China's growing economic and military strength means that it now holds the upper hand. As China's ambitions grow, so too do the risks of conflict, particularly in the South China Sea and Taiwan. These two regions are central to China's strategic vision and have become focal points for its rivalry with the US and its allies. In the South China Sea, China has laid claim to vast swathes of territory, building military installations on disputed islands and shoals. This has raised alarm among China's neighbors, particularly Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia, who see these actions as aggressive and expansionist. The US, which has long upheld the principle of freedom of navigation in these waters, has responded by conducting naval patrols and strengthening its alliances with countries in the region. But the biggest flashpoint is Taiwan. For Xi Jinping, taking control of Taiwan is not just a matter of national pride, it is a key element of his vision for China's future. Over the past decade, China has ramped up military pressure on the island, conducting regular air and naval drills designed to intimidate Taiwan and signal Beijing's willingness to use force if necessary. The US has made it clear that it will not stand idly by if China invades Taiwan. While Washington's policy on Taiwan is deliberately ambiguous, it has supplied the island with advanced military equipment and conducted joint exercises with its allies in the Indo-Pacific to deter Chinese aggression. But as China's military capabilities grow, the risk of miscalculation increases, and the possibility of a full-scale conflict looms larger. For India, the growing closeness between China and Russia presents a unique dilemma. India has long maintained a strategic partnership with Russia, dating back to the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was India's primary supplier of military hardware. But today, China has emerged as India's most significant strategic threat, particularly along the disputed Himalayan border. Since 2020, tensions between India and China have flared into violence, with deadly clashes between their troops in the remote regions of Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh. These skirmishes have deepened India's mistrust of China and pushed it closer to the US and other democratic powers in the Indo-Pacific. At the same time, India remains reluctant to sever its ties with Russia. Russian weapons still form the backbone of India's military, and Delhi values its long-standing relationship with Moscow. But as Russia becomes more aligned with China, India faces a difficult balancing act: how to maintain its strategic independence without alienating either of its powerful neighbors. While much of the focus on China's military modernization has been on its conventional forces, its nuclear capabilities are also growing rapidly. Recent satellite imagery has revealed that China is building hundreds of new missile silos in its western desert, a significant expansion of its nuclear arsenal. By the 2030s, China is expected to have over 1,000 nuclear warheads, putting it on a par with Russia and the United States. This rapid build-up is raising concerns in Washington and other capitals about the possibility of a new nuclear arms race. For decades, nuclear deterrence between the US and Russia was managed through a series of arms control agreements, but with China now entering the picture as a third nuclear superpower, the calculus is changing. China's nuclear strategy has long been based on minimal deterrence, maintaining a small arsenal designed to retaliate in the event of a nuclear attack. But with its growing capabilities, Beijing may be rethinking its approach. If China and Russia were to coordinate their nuclear forces, the threat to the US and its allies would be significantly magnified. As the Sino-Russian partnership deepens, it is clear that the world is entering a new era of geopolitical competition. The US and its allies, long the dominant players on the global stage, now face a formidable challenge from two autocratic powers determined to reshape the international system. In Europe, Russia's war in Ukraine has galvanized NATO, bringing the alliance closer together and reinforcing its commitment to collective defense. But in other parts of the world, particularly in the global south, the influence of China and Russia is growing. Through initiatives like China's Belt and Road Initiative and the BRICS Alliance, Beijing and Moscow are building a network of partnerships with emerging economies, offering an alternative to the Western-led world order. At the United Nations, China and Russia are working together to push back against Western norms, particularly on issues like human rights and democracy. In the UN Human Rights Council, for example, China has succeeded in watering down resolutions on issues like freedom of speech and the rule of law, replacing them with its own vision of shared prosperity and mutual respect. This battle for influence is not just about ideology, it is about control of the global economy, technology, and the military balance of power. For the US and its allies, the challenge is clear: how to contain the ambitions of two authoritarian powers without sparking a direct conflict that could lead to global catastrophe. As Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin left their meeting in the Kremlin, the message they sent to the world was unmistakable. China and Russia are united in their mission to reshape the global order. For them, this is a long-term struggle, one that will likely define the coming decades. For the rest of the world, this partnership presents a profound challenge. The US and its allies must find a way to navigate this new geopolitical landscape, balancing deterrence with diplomacy, while maintaining the alliances that have underpinned global stability since the end of World War II. We stand at a crossroads, as leaders from Washington to Berlin to Delhi have warned. The stakes are high, and the outcome is uncertain. But one thing is clear: the world is changing, and China and Russia are determined to drive that change together.